The morning sunlight streamed through the towering windows of courtroom 7A, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Judge Michael Bennett adjusted his reading glasses, his fingers absently tracing the worn edges of his father's pocket watch, a cherished graduation gift from 20 years ago. The timepiece had become a source of both comfort and melancholy since his father's passing 3 months earlier. As he reviewed the day's docket, a name caught his attention: Sarah Williams versus Municipal Authority. Something about the name tickled at the edge of his memory, like a half-remembered dream. Bennett dismissed the thought, attributing it to the lack of sleep that had plagued him since receiving the mysterious letter about his father's safety deposit box last week. The courtroom doors swung open precisely at 9:00 a.m., and the usual morning procession began. Bennett watched as attorneys, defendants, and observers filed in, each taking their designated places in the choreographed routine he'd witnessed thousands of times before. Yet today felt different, charged with an inexplicable energy he couldn't quite name. When Sarah Williams's case was called, Bennett's world shifted ever so slightly on its axis. The woman who approached the podium carried herself with a grace that seemed hauntingly familiar. Her chin tilted at a precise angle that stirred something in his memory, the same way his father used to hold his head when deep in thought. Bennett found himself gripping the edge of his desk, his knuckles white against the dark wood. Sarah wore her hospital scrubs beneath a neat blazer, her ID badge from Metropolitan Children's Hospital still clipped to her pocket. The sight triggered a flash of memory. His father's numerous dinner conversations about the hospital board, his passionate advocacy for expanding the pediatric wing. Bennett had always attributed his father's interest to civic duty. But now, "Your Honor," Sarah began, her voice clear and measured, "I understand the gravity of accumulated parking violations." She gestured with her right hand, fingers splayed in a manner that made Bennett's breath catch. It was exactly how his father emphasized important points during his law firm presentations. As she presented her case, explaining the circumstances behind her violations, long emergency shifts at the hospital, a broken parking permit machine, a series of unfortunate timing coincidences, Bennett found himself struggling to maintain his usual judicial detachment. Every movement, every inflection in her voice seemed to echo with significance he couldn't yet decipher. The morning light shifted, catching Sarah's profile, and for a moment, Bennett saw another face superimposed over hers, his father's, from an old photograph taken in his early 30s. The same determined set of the jaw, the same subtle arch of the eyebrows when making a crucial point. Bennett's hand moved unconsciously to his father's watch, its weight suddenly more pronounced against his wrist. A subtle tremor crept into his fingers as he made his notes, his usually pristine handwriting betraying his inner turmoil. The logical part of his mind insisted these similarities were mere coincidence, pattern-seeking in a grief-addled brain. Yet something deeper, more instinctive, whispered that he was standing on the precipice of a truth that would reshape his understanding of family, identity, and his own place in the world. As Sarah concluded her statement, her final words hung in the air. "Sometimes, Your Honor, life presents us with circumstances that defy simple categorization into right and wrong." The irony of her words would only become apparent to Bennett much later, when the contents of his father's safety deposit box would reveal just how profound that statement truly was. Sarah's case file lay open on Judge Bennett's desk, her words still echoing in the hushed courtroom. The morning sun had climbed higher now, washing the wood-paneled walls in amber light. Bennett found himself staring at her hospital ID photo paperclipped to the documentation. The same hospital where his father had served as a board member for over 2 decades. "Ms. Williams," Bennett began, his voice steadier than he felt, "your dedication to your profession is commendable." He paused, watching as she adjusted her blazer with a gesture so familiar it made his chest tighten. However, the law requires consistent application, regardless of circumstances. From her seat, Sarah pulled out a small leather notebook, its worn edges and brass corners instantly recognizable to Bennett. His father had carried one exactly like it for years, jotting down his thoughts and observations. She opened it carefully, revealing pages filled with neat, slanted handwriting. Another echo that sent a shiver down his spine. "Your Honor, I've documented every incident," Sarah explained, her finger tracing down the pages. "The night of February 12th, we had a critical case, a 5-year-old boy with severe trauma. I couldn't leave him." Her voice carried the same quiet intensity his father had shown when arguing important cases. "The parking garage was full, the street permit machine was broken, and I made a choice between being on time to save a life or finding parking blocks away." Bennett found himself studying her features more intently now. The way she held her head high, the slight furrow between her brows when concentrating. All of it screamed of connections he wasn't ready to acknowledge. His father's watch felt heavy on his wrist, its ticking marking time in a courtroom that suddenly seemed too small, too intimate for the weight of unspoken truths. "The following incidents," Sarah continued, turning a page with the same deliberate care his father had shown with important documents, "occurred during similar emergencies. I've included statements from the charge nurse and attending physician." She withdrew several letters, each bearing the hospital's distinctive letterhead, the same letterhead he'd seen countless times on his father's desk. Bennett accepted the letters, his fingers brushing against hers momentarily. A peculiar sensation washed over him, like puzzle pieces shifting into place without revealing the full picture. The signatures at the bottom of each letter bore names he recognized from his father's funeral. Doctors who had attended with tears in their eyes, who had spoken of Richard Bennett's extraordinary commitment to the hospital community. "I understand the importance of city ordinances, Your Honor," Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts. "But I also understand the importance of being there when people need you most." The words hit Bennett like a physical force. They were almost exactly what his father had written in his last Christmas card. "Always be there when people need you most, Michael." Looking down at the bench, Bennett noticed his hands had assumed the same thoughtful pose he'd seen in photographs of his father presiding over cases, fingers steepled, thumbs crossed. The realization made him straighten abruptly. The mounting coincidences were becoming impossible to ignore, yet the full truth remained tantalizingly out of reach. "Ms. Williams," he said finally, his judicial tone wavering slightly, "while your circumstances are compelling." He trailed off, distracted by a small golden chain visible at her neck, one that seemed to hold a pendant identical to the one his father had always claimed was waiting for the right moment to be given. The safety deposit box sat on Judge Bennett's kitchen table, its brushed steel surface reflecting the soft evening light. He'd driven straight from the bank to his home, the box feeling impossibly heavy in his hands despite its modest size. His father's watch showed 7:42 p.m., the same time that had been frozen on his father's own watch when they'd found him in his study 3 months ago. Bennett's hands trembled slightly as he inserted the key. The lock turned with a soft click that seemed to echo through his silent house. Inside, he found a leather-bound journal with his father's initials, RGB, embossed in gold, and beneath it, a cream-colored envelope sealed with his father's distinctive wax seal, the same seal he'd used on important documents throughout his legal career. He lifted the journal first, its leather soft and warm to the touch. Opening it, a photograph slipped out, his father at what appeared to be a hospital fundraiser 25 years ago. He stood next to a striking woman in a blue dress, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Bennett's breath caught as he recognized her. She had Sarah's smile, her elegant posture. On the back, in his father's precise handwriting, "Margaret and me, Spring Gala, 1999. The night everything changed." With unsteady fingers, he broke the wax seal on the envelope. 3 pages of his father's distinctive handwriting emerged, the ink still crisp and dark. "My dearest Michael, by the time you read this, I will be gone, and the truth I've carried for 25 years can finally be told. You're sitting in your chambers now, perhaps wearing the watch I gave you, upholding the principles of justice I try to instill in you. But there's one principle I failed to uphold myself: the truth. Margaret Williams was more than just the brilliant head of pediatric surgery at Metropolitan. She became my compass, my confidant, and eventually my greatest love. Our daughter, Sarah, was born in the winter of 2000, the happiest and most haunting day of my life. Happy because she was perfect in every way, haunting because I lacked the courage to acknowledge her publicly. I watched from afar as Margaret raised our daughter with grace and strength. Sarah inherited her mother's brilliant mind and my stubborn determination. I helped quietly, anonymous college funds, carefully channeled opportunities, silent support. But I never gave her what she truly deserved: a father's open love and acknowledgement. You'll recognize Sarah when you see her. She has my mother's eyes, my gestures, your grandmother's quiet strength. She's a pediatric nurse now at Metropolitan, saving lives with the same dedication Margaret showed. She wears a golden pendant identical to your mother's, the only gift I ever dared give her directly, on her 16th birthday. I've watched with pride as both my children have grown into remarkable people. You, Michael, carrying forward our family's legal legacy with integrity and compassion. Sarah, embodying the best of both her parents in service to others. But my pride has been a silent one, locked away in this box along with the truth. The irony that you both work in the same city, unknowingly crossing paths, has not escaped me. Perhaps you've even encountered each other in your professional lives. If so, I wonder if some part of you recognize the connection. The same blood running through your veins, the same mannerisms passed down through generations. I leave this truth in your hands now, son. What you do with it is your choice. But know this: Sarah has grown into someone extraordinary, someone any father would be proud to claim. I wasn't brave enough to do so in life. Perhaps in death, I can finally give both my children what they deserve: the truth. The attic of Richard Bennett's Victorian home hadn't been touched since his passing. Judge Michael Bennett stood in the doorway, flashlight beam cutting through dust motes that danced in the air. His father's letter sat folded in his pocket, its weight a constant reminder of the task ahead. After 3 sleepless nights, he'd finally gathered the courage to search for more evidence of the sister he'd never known he had. In the far corner, he spotted what he was looking for: a cedar chest with brass fittings, his father's initials carved into the lid. The key from the safety deposit box fit perfectly. Inside, beneath layers of carefully preserved tissue paper, lay the answers to questions he hadn't known to ask. The first album he pulled out was labeled simply Hospital Board, 1995 to 2005. His fingers trembled as he opened it, revealing page after page of photographs from fundraisers, galas, and board meetings. His father appeared in many, but now Bennett's attention was drawn to the woman who consistently stood nearby: Dr. Margaret Williams, Sarah's mother. He noticed the subtle ways they interacted in each photo: shared glances, similar poses, the careful distance that now seemed more deliberate than professional. "Found you," Bennett whispered, discovering a candid shot from what appeared to be a Christmas party. His father and Margaret stood near a decorated tree, both laughing at something off-camera. The joy in their expressions was unmistakable, unguarded. On the back, his father had written, "The night she told me about the baby. Everything changes now." Deeper in the chest, he discovered a small box containing newspaper clippings. One highlighted Margaret's appointment as head of pediatric surgery. Another celebrated Sarah's high school graduation. She'd been valedictorian. His father had carefully preserved every milestone, creating a paper trail of the daughter he'd watched from afar. A manila envelope revealed more recent photographs, these taken with a long lens at what appeared to be Sarah's nursing school graduation. His father stood at the back of the crowd, beaming with pride he could never openly express. Bennett recognized the golden pendant around Sarah's neck in these photos, the same one she'd worn in his courtroom. At the bottom of the chest lay a leather portfolio. Inside, he found detailed financial records, college tuition payments, trust fund deposits, anonymous donations to causes Sarah had championed. His father had supported her in every way except the one that mattered most: acknowledgement. Bennett's phone buzzed, startling him. A text from the courthouse clerk. "Judge, found that case file you requested. Sarah Williams has appeared in your courtroom 3 times before. All minor infractions, all handled by you." His stomach clenched. Had some part of him sensed the connection each time? As he moved to close the chest, something caught his eye. A small wrapped package tucked into the corner. The card attached read, "For Sarah's wedding day, when it comes, give her what I never could, the truth about how much she was loved. Dad." Inside was a vintage sapphire ring, one Bennett recognized from old family photos. His grandmother's engagement ring, passed down through generations. Along with it was a handwritten letter, sealed but never delivered, explaining their entire family history. Bennett sat back against the attic wall, surrounded by the physical evidence of his father's secret life. In one hand, he held the sapphire ring. In the other, his phone displayed Sarah's current address, just 15 minutes from where he sat. The weight of destiny pressed against him as sunset painted the attic in shades of gold, the same colors that had filled his courtroom during their first true encounter. The Riverside Bookstore Cafe sat nestled between an antique shop and a flower market, its bay windows offering a view of the city park beyond. Judge Bennett arrived 20 minutes early, choosing a quiet corner table where sunlight filtered through potted ferns. His father's watch ticked steadily on his wrist, marking each moment until the meeting that would change everything. He'd called Sarah's office at Metropolitan Children's Hospital yesterday, his judicial authority making it easy to get through. "Ms. Williams, this is Judge Bennett. I need to discuss something of personal importance with you." There had been a pause on the line before she agreed, suggesting this corner of the city where she often spent her lunch breaks. The bell above the door chimed at exactly noon. Sarah entered, still in her hospital scrubs beneath a light jacket, the golden pendant catching the light. She carried a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, the same edition Bennett had spotted countless times on his father's nightstand. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, neither moved. "Judge Bennett," she said, approaching the table. Her voice carried a hint of uncertainty, different from her confident tone in the courtroom. "I admit, I'm curious about what could be so personal that it required this meeting." Bennett gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, call me Michael." His fingers brushed against the envelope in his jacket pocket, the one containing copies of the most important photographs he'd discovered. "That's an interesting book choice." Sarah's hand rested protectively on the novel. "It was a gift, years ago, from someone important." She paused, studying his face with new intensity. "You look like him, you know, especially around the eyes." The words hung in the air between them. Bennett's breath caught. She knew. All this time, she'd known. "How long?" he managed to ask, his judicial composure slipping. "Since I was 16, Sarah replied quietly. "The day this pendant appeared in my locker at school." She touched the golden chain. "Dad, Richard, he used to leave little signs like that. Never directly, never where anyone could prove anything, but enough that I knew he was watching over me." Bennett withdrew the envelope, placing it gently on the table. "I found these in his attic. Every milestone, every achievement. He kept them all." His voice softened. "He was there at your graduation, standing at the back." "I know," Sarah smiled sadly. "I saw him. We never spoke, but we had this understanding. He'd show up at important moments, just far enough away to maintain the secret, but close enough that I knew he cared." Bennett pulled out the photograph from the hospital gala. "Your mother. She's beautiful." "She is," Sarah agreed, touching the image gently. "She never spoke badly of him, you know. Always said life was complicated, that love sometimes has to take different forms than we expect." She looked up at Bennett. "She told me about you too. Said I had a brother who was making a difference in the world." The cafe bustled around them, but in their corner, time seemed to stand still. Bennett thought of the sapphire ring in his pocket, his father's final gift still waiting to be given. But for now, this moment, two siblings finding their way across years of silence, felt like enough. "I have his watch," Bennett said suddenly, unclasping it from his wrist. "Would you like to hear about the day he gave it to me? It was right after my first case as a judge." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with unshed tears and newfound connection. "I'd like that very much, brother." 2 weeks after their cafe meeting, Sarah and Michael Bennett sat in his father's study, surrounded by old photo albums and memories. The evening sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes that danced around them like tiny stars. They'd been meeting like this every few days, piecing together their shared history one story at a time. "Look at this one," Sarah said, carefully lifting a photograph from 1995. "Mom's first day as department head. See how Dad's standing in the background. He's practically glowing with pride." She traced the image with her finger, smiling at their father's barely concealed joy. Michael leaned closer, noting the familiar way their father's hands were clasped behind his back, a gesture he'd inherited without realizing it. "I remember that day differently," he mused. "He came home exceptionally happy, but I thought it was because he'd won a major case. Now I understand he was celebrating your mother's achievement." Sarah reached into her bag, pulling out a small leather-bound diary. "Mom gave me this last week. It's her journal from that year." She opened it carefully, the pages crackling with age. "Listen to this. Richard came to congratulate me today. His eyes held such warmth, such pride. If only circumstances were different. But we've made our choices, and our children must come first." Michael's throat tightened. He stood and walked to his father's desk, opening the top drawer to retrieve something he'd been waiting to share. "I found this yesterday," he said, returning with a stack of unmailed letters. "They're all addressed to you, one for every birthday, from 16 to 30. Sarah's hands trembled as she accepted them. He never sent them. No, but he kept them all. Each one sealed, dated, filled with everything he wished he could tell you. Michael watched as his sister carefully opened the first envelope. "He loved you, Sarah." His way of showing it was complicated, but it was real. April 16, 2016. Sarah read aloud, her voice wavering. "My dearest daughter, today you saved your first patient independently. I watched from the gallery as you performed emergency surgery on that little boy. Your hands were steady, your mind clear, just like your mother. I've never been more proud." She stopped, overcome with emotion. Michael moved closer, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. The gesture felt natural now, where it would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. "You know what's strange?" Sarah said, composing herself. "All those times I appeared in your courtroom, I wanted to say something. But I kept thinking about Mom's words, about choices and consequences, about protecting the people we love." Michael nodded, understanding flowing between them. "We can't change the past," he said softly, "but we can choose how we move forward." He hesitated, then added, "I'm presiding over a charity gala next month, supporting children's health care. Would you come as my guest? As my sister?" Sarah looked up, surprise and joy mingling in her expression. "You're ready for people to know." "I'm proud to have you as my sister," Michael replied firmly. "Dad kept you a secret out of fear and convention, but we don't have to carry that burden. We can write our own story." Sarah stood, moving to the window where the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Mom would love that," she said softly. "She always said the truth has a way of setting things right." Behind them, their father's old grandfather clock chimed 7 times, its deep resonance filling the study. On the desk, 2 watches lay side by side. Michael's daily companion and their father's spare, which Sarah now wore. Different paths, different lives, finally converging in the warm light of understanding and acceptance. Spring bloomed across the city as Sarah and Michael's relationship flourished in unexpected ways. They sat in Metropolitan Hospital's rooftop garden, sharing lunch during their newly established weekly meetings. Sarah's surgical scrubs and Michael's judicial robes created an odd pair, but their easy laughter bridged any apparent differences. "You should have seen their faces," Sarah said, describing her morning surgery. "When the chief surgeon introduced me as Dr. Williams, sister of Judge Bennett, I thought Dr. Martinez was going to drop his scalpel." She smiled, adjusting the golden pendant that now sat proudly outside her scrubs. "It feels different, being able to say it out loud." Michael nodded, understanding completely. Speaking of announcements, he pulled out an envelope from his briefcase. Mom's agreed to be the keynote speaker at next month's legal aid fundraiser. First time she'll be speaking at the courthouse since. He paused, both of them knowing what had kept her away all these years. "She called me last night," Sarah replied, her eyes bright with emotion. "Said it's time to stop letting old shadows dictate our futures. You know what she told me? That watching us build this relationship has helped her heal too." Michael reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against their father's letter, the one he'd read so many times these past months. "Dad would be proud of us, Sarah. Not just for our achievements, but for finding our way to each other." A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming cherry blossoms across the garden. Sarah pulled out her phone, showing Michael a photo of an elderly patient surrounded by family. "Remember that case you helped me with last week? Mr. Rodriguez. The pro bono legal aid you arranged helped his family stay together during his treatment. That's what this is all about, isn't it? Using our different strengths to help others." Michael smiled, remembering how their father had always emphasized the importance of public service. "We're better together," he agreed. "Your medical insight has already helped me understand healthcare cases with more nuance, and having a judge for a brother probably doesn't hurt when dealing with hospital administration," he added with a wink. Sarah laughed, then grew serious. "I found something in Mom's attic yesterday," she said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small, wrapped package. "It's Dad's old case notebook from his first year as a judge. Mom said he'd want you to have it." Michael carefully unwrapped the package, recognizing their father's precise handwriting. Inside the cover was an inscription he'd never seen. "Justice without compassion is like medicine without care. Remember to see the human story behind every case." He wrote that the day he met Mom, Sarah explained softly, she challenged one of his rulings, arguing for a more empathetic approach to a medical malpractice case. That's when he first realized that justice and mercy could work together. As the afternoon sun painted golden highlights across the garden, they began planning their first joint initiative, a medical legal partnership program at Metropolitan. It would combine Sarah's healthcare expertise with Michael's legal acumen, creating a support system for patients facing both medical and legal challenges. "Dad always said that true legacy isn't in what we achieve alone," Michael mused, "but in how we help others achieve their potential." Sarah touched her pendant, then reached over to adjust Michael's slightly crooked tie, a gesture that had already become natural between them. "Well, big brother," she said with a warm smile, "I'd say we're building quite a legacy of our own." 1 year after their first cafe meeting, the Metropolitan Hospital's grand auditorium buzzed with anticipation. The launch of the Bennett Williams Healthcare Justice Initiative had drawn hundreds of attendees, from medical professionals to legal experts. At the center of it all stood Sarah and Michael, their journey from strangers to siblings now a story of inspiration. Sarah adjusted Michael's bow tie one last time before they stepped onto the stage. "Remember when I was standing before you in court?" she whispered with a gentle smile. "Life has a funny way of bringing things full circle." Michael touched the watch on his wrist, their father's original timepiece, now keeping time for a new generation of Bennett legacy. "Dad would have loved this," he replied, noting how the afternoon sun streaming through the stained glass windows created a rainbow effect across the auditorium, much like that first day in his courtroom. Dr. Margaret Williams, elegant in her chief of surgery attire, took the podium first. "A year ago, I watched two worlds collide in ways I never imagined possible," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. Today, we witness how that collision has created something extraordinary. The screens behind her displayed photographs of their first success stories, a young mother who received both life-saving surgery and legal aid to keep her home, an elderly veteran whose medical care was secured through their program's advocacy, a child whose treatment became possible through their integrated support system. When Michael stepped up to speak, he pulled out their father's old notebook. In these pages, my father wrote about a vision of justice that went beyond the courtroom, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. He believed that true justice required understanding the whole story, the medical challenges, the legal obstacles, the human struggles. Today, with this initiative, we're making that vision a reality. Sarah joined him at the podium, their shoulders touching in a gesture of unity that had become natural over the past year. Every person who walks through our doors has a story, she added, just as my brother and I had our own story to discover. We learned that healing comes in many forms, sometimes through medicine, sometimes through justice, and sometimes through the simple act of finding connection. Together, they announced the expansion of their program to 3 more hospitals across the state. The initiative would provide integrated medical legal support to thousands of families, breaking down barriers between healthcare and justice systems that had seemed insurmountable just a year ago. As applause filled the auditorium, Sarah reached for the golden pendant at her neck, now joined by their grandmother's sapphire ring, which Michael had finally given her on her birthday. "You know what Mom told me this morning?" she whispered to her brother. "She said Dad used to dream about his children working together someday. He just never imagined it quite like this." Michael smiled, remembering the last lines of their father's letter. "Perhaps in death, I can finally give both my children what they deserve, the truth." The truth had done more than free them from secrets. It had created a legacy of healing that would touch countless lives. As they stepped down from the stage, Sarah's young son ran up to them, proudly wearing a toy stethoscope and carrying a tiny gavel, gifts from his Uncle Michael. "Uncle Mike," he called out, "did I do good sitting quiet?" Michael scooped up his nephew, marveling at how naturally the role of uncle had come to him. "Perfect, buddy. Just like a future judge. Or doctor," he added with a wink to Sarah. The afternoon light caught the inscription they had engraved on the initiative's foundation stone, "Where justice meets healing," in memory of Richard Bennett, who taught us that love finds its way.